fellow designers and creators, hope you're all doing well. Welcome back to another video in this Rive tutorial series. In this video, we're going to go ahead and create a button and animate the button so that when we press on the button, the animation happens. So over here, if I just play this, you can see the animation just happens. But I want to set a logic by saying that when I press on this button, I want to trigger the animation. Now, how to set the triggering animation? We will do that in the next video. But in this video, we will set up the various states for the button. So if I hover on the button, you can see we get a hover state and I can press on it to get a press state and I can release it, right? It's a very simple button interaction and we're going to use a concept called as listeners. And how does this work with conditions and all of this? We're going to go ahead and learn how to do that in this video. So without any further ado, let's get started. All right, so let's go ahead and create the button. Now, if I go to Figma, I created these two buttons, which is basically called start and something called as reset, okay? And I'm not going to be focusing on the reset animation because that can get quite complicated. I'm just going to do the start animation that is going to start and then it automatically transitions to the reset button. For now, I just want to copy this. So I can right click and choose copy as SVG. And then I can come back to Rive and I can go ahead and just paste that over here. And then in the assets panel, I should have the button. I'm just going to go ahead and call this button, all right? And I can go ahead and just drag that outside and paste that over here. I'm going to go ahead and make the artboard a little bit longer. All right. So I see the anchor point over here. I'm going to go ahead and just drag this out a little bit. And I think it keeps things in the center. So yeah, let me just drag this out and then we can take all of these items and then just move this a little bit up and then take the start button and move that over here. Now I'm going to go ahead and just customize a couple of things because we have a few things over here. So let me go and ungroup all of this first. So first one, we have this piece of text. Now I'm going to change this piece of text because right now it pasted it as a vector layer. I want it to be an actual text layer that I can change. All right. So this one, I'm going to keep that for now. All right. Then I have the rectangle. So what is this rectangle? If I delete this, so this is the top part of the rectangle. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and call this button surface or just call it surface. Okay. This one, as you can see, is there seems to be a stroke that we have added, which is coming in as a stroke. All right. So that's why. So maybe I can go ahead and call this stroke. And this one is going to be background. So we have three layers. So if I turn all of them off, so we have three layers. So we have the background layer, and then on that we have the stroke layer, which I will then combine. I'm just going to group them and call this background, put them together. And then we have the surface, all right? And then we also have the text layer, which I will create now. So I'm going to go ahead and just press T on the keyboard and click here, and I'm going to type in start, all right? And I want to set the origin. Let's move that over here. I want to set the origin of this to 50 by 50. So it's in the center like so, and we can customize it, right? Now I don't have it only provides Google fonts. It doesn't provide, all the fonts. And SF Pro, which is this one, what I used is something that I installed. Now, if I want to add fonts, I have to pay for a paid plan, but I'm not going to do that. So I can go ahead and just get a rounded font. So I'm going to search for round and let's see which rounded font looks good. And I think this one looks decent. All right. It's okay. It's not the best, but I think it's fine. And I think the font size of this, I had decided to set that to 14 is what I had probably chosen. And also a little bit of vertical gap, right? And also the thickness. Looks like I can't change the thickness of this. So let's try another font maybe. Let's try this one called Fredoka. Okay, this seems to be nice. All right. And I can probably choose a little bit of a thicker font. So let's do medium. And yeah, I think this one is fine. So I can paste that over here and I can delete this one. So then I can just move this over to the middle of the button. So I can just select the two layers and then align them to the middle. And we want to use this black color or whatever this color is, this blue color. So I'm just going to paste that. So this is our button. Maybe I can increase the thickness a little bit more. Semi-bold. Yeah, I think semi-bold looks nice. Now I also want to go ahead and add to this background an extra stroke that we are doing for all of them. So I'm going to go and add a stroke and I'm going to pick this color. All right. And I'm just going to increase the stroke quite a bit. All right. Now the problem here, it sort of encroaches on this one. So what I will do is I will remove the stroke, delete that, and I will create a new copy of this. I'm going to go ahead and just duplicate this, and I'm going to call this base, and then duplicate that, and I'm going to call this, this is going to be base, and this one is going to call shadow, right? Now the shadow is essentially going to be this color, and it's going to be a fill color, and I'm just going to increase the size of this, all right? So let's add 3 pixels on the left, 3 pixels on the right. That gives us 6 pixels. So size width, I'm going to add 6, go to the width like so. And on the top also, the top I want it to be on the button here as well. So 47, add 6 pixels, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All right. So this is basically what we want. And also it's got some rounding, as you can see the shadow. So I'm going to add a little bit more rounding of, let's try 14 pixels, right? To find the exact rounding, you take the rounding of this 12 and then you add how many ever pixels that is. So you have 12 pixels plus another 3 pixels, that is 15 pixels. So now the rounding over here can be 15 pixels. Okay, and now you have this super nice, round, cute button. I'm going to go ahead and just position all of this to be in the center. All right, and even the text also to be in the center, and there we go. Okay, so now we can just select all of these items. Okay, I don't know why the stars is getting selected, but I can just select these 3 items and I can group them, and this is going to be called our button. Okay, nice. So we now have our button that we can customize. So I'm going to move this button somewhere down over here, and when I tap on the button, everything happens. Now, we want to go ahead and set some animation states to the button. So let's go ahead and do that. Now, I'm going to go to the animate timeline, press F to frame this, or maybe we can move a little bit closer. Now, because we will have multiple states for the button, which is basically a hover state, a pressed state, a disabled state, because I can change the state of these buttons at any point in time, I can't make that into an animation. Because an animation is something that I can't control. But states are something that I can control. So I need to go ahead and create states now, which means I'm going to create a new layer and call this button animation. And here is where I will control how the button works. So I'll bring in all the various states. And when I say, when I hover, go to this state. When I press, when I go to this state. When it's selected, go to this state. So I'm going to put in all the states over here so that I can control how this button actually works. So I'm going to go and start creating the various states. Let's start by the first one, right? I'm going to go ahead and go to timeline. And here I'm going to say button active state. Pretty simple. Okay. And go to the state machine. I'm going to drop that over here. And here we're going to go to the entry and we're going to add that over here. This is pretty simple. You know, nothing is even going to happen over here. So if I play this, nothing even happens over here, but it's in the button active state. Now, when I hover on it, I want it to go to a hover state. So I'm going to go click on the plus over here, timeline. I'm going to say button hover state. Okay. So now, button hover state. Move this any state or exit to the side. With the entry, we have the button and then the button hover state. So now we basically have to say, hey, when I hover on this active state, I want you to hover to the hover state. So when I hover on this, I want you to hover to the hover state. Now, how do we do this? First of all, we need to tell Rive how the states even look like. So the button active state has nothing. We need to tell how it looks like. Now, between the active state and the hover state, the only thing that I'm changing is the color of the top surface. That is me deciding how I want the hover animation to work. So I can hold down control or command. I can hold down command and just click to select the surface layer. And I'm going to add a keyframe over here. That's it. So this is the color of going to be the hex code. This is the hex code when it's in the normal state. In the hover state, I want to change that color. So I'm going to add a keyframe and I'm going to just change it. So just move it over and make it a little bit brighter over here. Okay, that's about it. So the active state is going to look like this, and the hover state is going to look like this, where it looks like I can actually press on it, right? So now it will transition between these states. Now if I play this, it just directly goes to the hover state, right? Because we didn't set any conditions. It just jumps from the entry to the last state, all right? So now we have to say, hey, only when I hover on this thing, I want you to go to this state. So how do we set that up? Now, This is where we use the concept of listeners. Now think of listeners as physical items that you can interact with in your area. Because a listener is basically something that is listening to your interaction, right? So this button is listening to what you're actually doing. I mean, of course, grammatically it doesn't make sense. You can't listen to an action, all right? You should see it, but here, this element is listening to what you are essentially doing. So what does that mean? Now, if I click on the listener, okay, I basically get something called as listener 1. The first thing that I need to know is decide which part of this button should listen. Is it the entire button or is it just the top part? What should listen to it? Now, in this case, we can have the entire button, but I'm going to restrict it to the surface, all right? So if I click on the target, which means now I have to choose which element is listening, all right? Or basically waiting to see the hover state. So if I click on that and I choose surface, then you can see listener surface. Now here I can choose what should happen to this surface. When I hover on this, do something. So here I'm deciding when I hover on the surface, all right? Now pointer enter is basically hover, and all of this have been given different names. It's not like hover, selected, pressed, whatever. Pointer enter means hover on. Pointer exit means hover off. Pointer down is like I'm pressing or clicking and holding down. Pointer up is when I release. Pointer move is basically you're moving your cursor or your finger. Now click is also very similar to the rest. All right. It is basically combining pointer down and up, but that's fine. We can ignore that. Let's just do a pointer enter, which is essentially hover. So when I hover on the surface, now the surface is listening to the hover, which is basically waiting to hover. What should happen? So think of it as an if-else statement. If I hover on the surface, set something to something, do something, all right? Now, what I basically want to do is set an input, because I can only set inputs over here, okay? And the hover state, essentially, if I choose one of the inputs, it's not a number, it's not a trigger. It could work as a trigger, all right? It's basically an action. But I want to choose a Boolean, which is like an on or off state, because typically I just have two states. Is something on or is something off, all right? So I'll go and choose Boolean, and here I'm going to say hover effect, okay? So if I click on the listener 1, okay, and I'm going to call this button surface. This is the element that is listening to the hover state. So if the button surface is listening and sees a hover, when I hover over this, then I want you to set the hover effect. Turn that on, so now it's off. I want you to turn it on when I hover on that. So what does that mean? So if I come over here and I just play the animation, it suddenly plays. All right. And as you see, as I hovered on it, it changed. All right. Now, the first thing that we need to do is set a condition saying that, look, I want you to transition to this only if the hover is active. We haven't defined that over here. We defined that there is this hover effect switch that is somewhere, but we need to link that switch by adding a condition over here. So this transition should happen by adding a condition, and conditions need to come from inputs. So conditions over here, transition from the active state to the hover state if the hover effect is true, right? Right now it's false, but if it is true, then you transition. If it is not true, don't transition, right? Pretty simple logic. So now if I play this, and now as you can see, it's in the active state, right? It's not transitioning to the hover state because I need to hover on this, and when I hover, it then transitions to the hover state, and also it gets selected over here. Now when I hover out, it basically needs to come back to the old state. So we basically need to go and say, now if I add another arrow mark over here, the going back, all right, I want you to hover. I want you to go back to the active state if the hover effect is false, all right? So now if I play this, it's on this state. I hovered, it turned on the switch, but now when I hover out, it doesn't turn it off, right? Even though we set the condition, it is not hovering off. So here for the button surface, we actually told it to listen to pointer hover. but we also need to tell it to listen to pointer exit. All right. Now, one weird thing in Rive here is that I can't, with one element, I can't define both the hover, the pointer enter and the pointer exit states. I have to, do it separately. So now I'm going to go ahead and probably just call this surface to keep things simple. And I'm going to say surface to make things easy. I'm just going to say hover in, hover on. Okay. And this one is going to be called surface again. And we're going to say hover off. Now, a super neat trick is, let me actually delete this one. If I click on an element and then I click on the listener, the target is automatically added. So always make sure you click on an element and then apply the listener. So then the target is added so that you don't have to do the reverse. So I'm just going to copy this, paste that, and then turn this to hover off. Now here, this surface is going to be listening to two things. It is going to be listening to a pointer enter. It is also going to be listening to a pointer exit. And when I hover outside, it is going to set the hover effect to false. It's going to turn it off. Okay. So now let's play this again. So now I'm going to click on play. Now it's in the active state. If I hover, it moves to the hover state, as you can see in the timeline, or basically the state machine. If I hover off, it comes back to this. So hover on, hover off, hover on, hover off. Now we want a little bit of transition. So here, because now we want to change from the hover state to the active state, that gradual state change gave a little bit of duration, probably around 100 milliseconds. And I'm going to add a little bit of easing. Same thing over here for the other one. So 100 milliseconds, add easing. Now let's play this and check that again. So it's in the active state, hover, great. As you can see, perfect. Nice. Now, the next thing is I need to press on this, right? So when I press on it, I want you to sort of shrink in size, right? Because this is just hover. I want to actually press on it. So what we now need is called a button pressed state. So button pressed state. How does it look when the button is pressed? Okay. So now I'm going to come to the state machine. Now, the press state can happen only when I've hovered on it or, mouse is entered on it, right? So I'm going to click on the press state. I'm going to bring that over here. Now here on the hover state, if I hover outside, it goes back to the active state. But if I press, all right, then it needs to come to the pressed state. Now, design how the press state looks like. So here in the press state, I want to do a couple of things, all right? The first thing is I want to click on the surface and add a property for the Y. And I'm going to bring that down like so. Okay. So this is how it's going to look. I'm going to take the text, add a keyframe for that, bring that down also. So it's in the center like so. And I also want this background. All right. So I can actually take the background and shrink that. Now it does some weird thing, which is, so maybe I'm not going to touch the background. I'm going to touch the shadow, all right? And I'm going to shrink that down like so. Okay? So this shadow is basically adding position and path, position, and also the height, all right? So basically this. So if I move, this is basically how the press state looks like. Maybe the text, I need to bring that a little bit down. No, I think this is fine. If I want to quickly check the surface, is it was -2, it became +2, so that's 4 pixels. So the text, I don't know what the text was. If I go to the hover state, text was -2.5. All right. And maybe, you know what, let me just go to the design mode and let me just set that to -2. All right. Keep things simple. And then here in the hover state is -2. Here is also -2. Here should probably do +2, right? So because the surface is moving, if you see over here, the surface is moving from -2 to +2. And so the text also should move from -2 to +2, all right? Now, one of the most important things here is that now the hover state has only the surface keyframe. The press state has text and shadow. So what we want to do is we want to go ahead and go to the hover state and add those keyframes as well, or else the animation will break. So come to the hover state and just add those blank keyframes just for the text. So the text position, because that is one thing. So you can see the text position. So we just add the text position. Then we have the surface. So that we already added. Now for surface, we have the position X and Y. Now we don't really need the X position, so I can just probably delete the X position. We just need the Y position. So here for the surface, we added the fill. What I need is the X position is the Y position as well. So I can click on the surface and a keyframe for the Y. Now for the shadow, we have a position here, and we also have a couple of things over here. Now the height, the position of this path, I can actually delete that. We don't need that. We just need the position Y and the height of the path. All right. So I'm going to go to the shadow in the hover state. I'm going to add a position keyframe for the Y, and for the path, I want to choose the height over here. So if I look over here, we see shadow position, then we have path height, and here we also have path and height. All right. Now we should be able to transition between this. So basically the press state and then the hover state. Now you also in the press state, you can see that the color changes. So here it is dark and here it is not. So here I want to keyframe the color as well, because here we have the color. Now when I press, I don't want this color. I want it to default to the original color, all right, which is basically this. So I'm going to click on the surface and just add a keyframe for the color as well. All right, perfect. So now we have the button press state. Now the button press state should happen when the surface is listening to a button press. So the surface was listening to hover off. It was listening to hover on. We wanted to listen to a press as well. So I'm going to say press. Okay. I'm going to press down. So now when I pointer down is basically press down. When I press down, all right, I want you to change the state. Now here we have the hover effect. Okay. Now I can't choose the hover effect because the hover effect is already decided between these two. I need to create a new one, new input. All right. If I go and choose a Boolean, so we have two things. I can say press effect, press on or press off. All right. So when the surface is pressed down, when the press down happens, set the press effect to turn it on. So just turn on the effect. Okay. And we're going to do the opposite. If I go ahead and duplicate this, if I go ahead and say press up, which basically means that I'm releasing my finger, all right, which is pointer up, change the press effect to false. So if I press down, the effect is turned on. If it is removed, then the effect is turned off, right? So let's see how that looks. So over here, I want to say transition from the hover state to the pressed state, all right, if the press effect is true, okay? And transition back to the hover state, all right? So button press state to the hover state, transition back if the press effect is false, all right? So this condition is combining with listeners and with combining with inputs. So now let's test this out. So I'm going to click on the play icon. Now it's in the active state. Now when I hover, you can see there's a hover animation. Now, and you can see changing over here as well. All right. Now when I press, this should light up. So when I press, you can see it lights up. And I'm actually holding down my finger on my trackpad. When I release, I come back. Or press, release, press, release. All right. Now, obviously, we want a little bit of a transition. All right. So from here, I'm probably going to say 50 milliseconds. Maybe 100 is too much. Just ease this out. And this one also 50 milliseconds. And ease this up because we want the button press to be quite fast. So let's try again. You can see now it's animating. So now if I press on it, you can see we get this nice bouncy animation. Perfect, right? Amazing, looks good. So now that we have this button animation set up, in the next video, we can go ahead and trigger this button animation to start the animation. Because right now, if I play this, you can see it just starts. I want to say, hey, wait, hold on. Only when I press and release my finger, then I want you to start it. Because that's how buttons work. You press and release, that's when something is happening. All right. So when I press, wait, don't do anything. When I release, do the animation. All right. And we're going to go ahead and do that in the next video. So that's pretty much it for this video, guys. Thank you guys so much for watching. Hope you guys really enjoyed it. If you did, let me know in the comment section down below. Make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel for more amazing awesome content. See you guys in the next video. So then take care. Bye-bye.